I spent 45 years building a secure future for my son, working double shifts and sacrificing my own dreams so he could have every opportunity I never had. But I never imagined that after my emergency hip replacement surgery, he would hand me eviction papers while I was still recovering in the guest bedroom of his lavish home. What Derek didn't know was that Aspen Valley Lending, the financial institution that held his underwater mortgage and had recently refinanced his failing restaurant's business loan, was actually mine, built from the ground up through decades of quiet investment while I pretended to be just a retired schoolteacher. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sunlight filtered through the expensive curtains of Derek's guest bedroom as I carefully adjusted my position in bed. The physical therapist had been clear. Move enough to prevent stiffness, but don't overdo it. 3 weeks had passed since my hip replacement surgery, and though I'd been told recovery would take months, I'd been making steady progress despite the discomfort. At 68, I wasn't bouncing back as quickly as I might have in my younger years, but I was determined to regain my independence. I heard the distinctive sound of my son's footsteps approaching, the slight squeak of Italian leather shoes against hardwood that announced his presence before he even knocked. Derek had always appreciated the finer things in life, something I'd both admired and worried about since he was a teenager. "Mom, are you decent?" His voice carried through the door, oddly formal this morning. "Come in, sweetheart," I called, adjusting my robe to cover the bandages. The door opened, and there stood my son, all 6 feet of him impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. At 45, Derek had his father's build and confident stance. But my eyes, deep hazel with flecks of gold that could warm with laughter or harden with determination. Today, those familiar eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, hovering by the doorway instead of coming to sit on the edge of the bed as he usually did during his increasingly brief morning check-ins. "Better," I replied, watching him carefully. "Dr. Sharma says I'm healing well. I might even be able to start using just a cane instead of the walker next week." Derek nodded distractedly, finally stepping into the room. I noticed he was carrying a thick manila envelope, which he turned over in his hand several times. A gesture I recognized from his childhood, something he did when he was anxious about delivering bad news. "That's good to hear. Listen, Mom, we need to talk about some arrangements, going forward." A chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature settled over me. I'd raised Derek by myself after his father died in a construction accident, when Derek was only 10. Working as an elementary school teacher by day and taking night shifts at a local diner, I'd somehow managed to put him through college and help with the down payment on his first restaurant. All while quietly building my own financial security through careful investing and an unexpected talent for identifying promising business opportunities. But Derek knew nothing about that side of my life. To him, I was just his practical penny-pinching mother who'd somehow managed to retire comfortably, but certainly not wealth. He had no idea that the little investments I'd started making with his father's modest life insurance payout had grown into Aspen Valley Lending, now one of the largest private mortgage companies in the state. "What kind of arrangements?" I asked, keeping my voice casual despite the warning bells ringing in my head. Derek cleared his throat, fingering his expensive silk tie. "Caroline and I have been talking. Emma is entering high school next year, and Tyler's travel hockey team is getting more competitive. We really need the extra space." I glanced around the generously sized guest bedroom of their 6,000-square-foot mansion in Lakeview Heights. Derek and Caroline had built this showcase home 5 years ago, insisting they needed every square inch for their growing family needs and entertainment obligations. The guest room where I'd been recovering was larger than the master bedroom of the home where I'd raised him. "I understand," I said slowly. "Once I'm back on my feet, I'll be out of your hair. Dr. Sharma thinks maybe another 3 weeks until I can safely manage stairs on my own." That's the thing, Mom, Derek interrupted, finally extending the envelope toward me. We've found a really nice senior living complex, Sunset Pines. Top-rated, excellent medical staff, activities programs. We've already put down a deposit to... Hold your spot. My fingers felt oddly numb as I took the envelope. Senior living? Derek, I'm only 68. I just had hip surgery. I'm not incapacitated. It's the sensible solution, Mom, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to recognize whenever he thought he was being the rational one. You shouldn't be alone in that old house anymore. It's too much maintenance, too many hazards. What if you fall again and no one's there to help? I wanted to remind him that my fall had been a minor accident in a grocery store parking lot during an ice storm, not some sign of advancing frailty. I wanted to point out that the old house was the same comfortable 3-bedroom ranch where I'd raised him, which was fully paid off and carefully maintained. Instead, I opened the envelope. Inside wasn't just brochures for Sunset Pines, but legal documents, an eviction notice giving me 30 days to vacate the guest room, and a power of attorney form awaiting my signature that would give Derek control over my financial affairs. You're evicting me? While I'm recovering from surgery? The words felt strange in my mouth. Derek had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. It's not an eviction, Mom. It's a transition plan. The kids need this space. Emma wants to set up a beauty vlogging studio, and Tyler needs room for his hockey equipment and training space. I stared at my son, this stranger in expensive clothes who had once been the little boy I'd comforted after nightmares. The teenager I'd taught to drive in our old station wagon. The young man whose first restaurant security deposit I'd covered, without hesitation when his own credit was too limited to secure the lease. Where's Caroline? I asked quietly. At her Pilates class. She thought it would be better if I spoke to you alone. Of course she did. My daughter-in-law had always been strategic, maintaining plausible deniability in family conflicts while privately directing Derek toward decisions that aligned with her vision of their perfect life. I see. I carefully refolded the papers and placed them back in the envelope. And when exactly am I expected to make this transition? The room at Sunset Pines will be ready next Monday. We've hired movers to pack up whatever you need from your house. The rest we can sell or donate. Sell my things. I felt a surge of anger that made my healing hip throb. You've decided to sell my possessions? Derek straightened, adjusting his tie again. Mom, be reasonable. Your house has 3 bedrooms and decades of accumulated stuff. Sunset Pines gives you a nice studio apartment. You can't take everything. I thought about my home, not just the furniture or clothing, but the lifetime of memories it contained. The study with my husband's old desk preserved just as he'd left it. The garden I'd nurtured for decades, with perennials that had outlived their expected lifespan through my careful attention. The home office where I'd built Aspen Valley Lending from nothing, carefully keeping my ownership private through a series of holding companies and trusts. Derek knew nothing about Aspen Valley. To him, I was just his retired mother who'd once had a modest teaching career. He had no idea that the seemingly inconsequential financial decisions I'd made over decades had grown into one of the largest private lending institutions in the state. Or that 3 months ago, when his restaurant's business loan was about to default after a series of poor management decisions, I'd quietly arranged for Aspen Valley to acquire it, giving him more favorable terms without him ever knowing the connection. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. There's not much to think about, Mom. It's all arranged. Derek glanced at his watch. I've got a meeting at the restaurant at 10. Something about my business loan moving to a new servicer. Again, these financial companies keep getting shuffled around. If only he knew. I watched my son walk out, closing the door behind him. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so painful. The son who was evicting me from his home had no idea that I owned the company that held both his overpriced mortgage and his struggling business loan. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, wincing at the pull on my healing hip. I had a call to make to my executive assistant at Aspen Valley. It was time to reconsider those favorable terms I'd arranged for my ungrateful son. If Derek wanted to treat me like a burden to be discarded, perhaps it was time he learned exactly who he was dealing with. I waited until I heard the front door close and Derek's luxury SUV pull out of the driveway before slowly making my way to the window. The sprawling lawn of Derek's Lakeview Heights estate stretched out before me, immaculately maintained by a landscaping service that cost more per month than most people's mortgage payments. In the distance, I could see the actual lake that gave the neighborhood its name, dotted with boats despite the early hour. Standing there, leaning on my walker, I thought about the modest apartment above my father's hardware store where I'd grown up. How my parents had sacrificed to send me to college, the first in our family to attend. How my late husband Thomas and I had scrimped and saved to buy our small ranch house, thrilled to have a yard where Derek could play. The long years after Thomas died, when I worried if I could keep that house, keep Derek in good clothes, keep food on the table, and now my son, raised with so much love and such modest surroundings, couldn't make room in his enormous home for his recovering mother. Couldn't see the value in the house where he'd grown up. Couldn't imagine that I might still have agency, purpose, and wisdom to offer. The house was silent. Caroline wouldn't return from her Pilates class, followed by her standing lunch date, for at least another 3 hours. I needed that time to think, to plan. The kitchen was immaculate, all gleaming granite and stainless steel appliances that looked barely used. Caroline preferred their personal chef to prepare meals 4 days a week, claiming cooking was an unnecessary burden for a modern professional woman. I smiled faintly, remembering how I'd managed to cook homemade meals for Derek almost every night, even while working full-time and taking night classes in accounting and finance. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the massive kitchen island, pulling my phone from my robe pocket. 3 quick taps, and I was connected to Maggie, my executive assistant at Aspen Valley for the past 12 years. "Eleanor, how are you feeling? I've been meaning to visit, but I didn't want to reveal anything to your son." Maggie's warm voice was tinged with concern. "That discretion is exactly why you're invaluable to me, Maggie. And unfortunately, very necessary. I need you to pull the complete files on Derek Thornton's accounts, both the mortgage on the Lakeview Heights property and the business loan for Thornton's Bistro." "Give me a moment." I could hear her fingers clicking across her keyboard. "Accessing them now. The mortgage is substantial. $1.5 million remaining with that interest rate reduction you authorized last year. The business loan is $850,000, restructured 3 months ago when we acquired it from First Regional." I took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth soothe my throat. "What's the current equity position on the house?" "Based on recent appraisals, they're underwater by about $250,000. They took out that second mortgage for the pool renovation and home theater last summer. Remember?" I did remember. I'd cautioned against it when Derek had mentioned their plans at Sunday dinner, suggesting they wait until his restaurant was more stable. He'd dismissed my concerns as old-fashioned thinking and proceeded anyway. "And the business loan collateral?" "It's secured by their investment portfolio and that commercial property on Weston Avenue. But between us, Eleanor, that property isn't worth nearly what they claimed in the application. If we called the loan tomorrow, they couldn't cover it." I nodded to myself. "What about their overall financial position? Credit cards, other loans?" "Pretty much what you'd expect." Maggie sighed. "Maxed out cards, leased vehicles they can barely afford, private school tuition for both kids. They're living on the financial edge, even with your behind-the-scenes help." This wasn't news to me. I'd watched Derek and Caroline's spending habits with growing concern for years. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, country club memberships, all purchased on credit with the assumption that Derek's restaurant would eventually turn enough profit to cover everything. It rarely did. One more thing, Maggie. What's the status of the Sunset Pines property? I heard more typing. Sunset Pines? Ah, interesting. The senior living facility is actually owned by Wellington Properties, which is one of the commercial real estate portfolios in our investment group. We financed their expansion last year. I couldn't help but laugh, though it made my hip ache. So my son is trying to move me into a facility that I technically own a significant stake in. Appears so, Maggie replied. Eleanor, what exactly is going on? I briefly explained the morning's events, including the eviction notice and Derek's plans to sell my possessions. That ungrateful little... Maggie rarely lost her professional demeanor, but her loyalty to me ran deep. What do you want to do? She asked, once she'd composed herself. I'm not entirely sure yet, I admitted, but I need you to freeze any special considerations on both the mortgage and business loan. Return them to standard terms effective immediately. Consider it done, Maggie said. Anything else? Yes. I need a car to pick me up tomorrow morning. And I need you to prepare the guest suite at my house. I'll be returning home earlier than planned. But Eleanor, your recovery will continue at my own house with appropriate nursing care, I said firmly. Also, contact Jennifer at the law firm. I need to review my estate planning documents as soon as possible. After finishing the call, I sat quietly watching sunlight dance across the kitchen's expensive marble floor. My heart felt heavy, and not just from the anesthesia still working its way out of my system. Where had I gone wrong with Derek? When had he transformed from the thoughtful boy who made me handmade Mother's Day cards into this materialistic man who saw me as a burden? I slowly made my way back upstairs, each step a reminder of my physical vulnerability. In the guest room, I began carefully gathering my belongings, taking inventory of what I'd brought for my supposed 2-month recovery stay. Now I'd be leaving after just 3 weeks. I packed methodically, the way I'd learned to approach all problems in my life, with calm deliberation and careful planning. As I folded a sweater, I heard the front door opening and Caroline's voice drifting up from downstairs as she talked loudly on her phone. Yes, next Monday. Mom-in-law's finally being moved to Sunset Pines. I know, I've been counting down the days. Do you know she actually asked Maria to make her chicken soup from scratch? Like we're living in the 1950s or something. I paused in my packing, listening to my daughter-in-law laugh about me with whoever was on the other end of the call. The best part is Derek finally convinced her it's for her own good. You know how she is, always going on about independence and managing on her own. Please. She can barely walk up the stairs without getting winded. That hip replacement is the perfect excuse to get her settled somewhere with supervision. My hand instinctively went to my hip, feeling the bandage beneath my nightgown. My hip replacement was necessary after years of arthritis exacerbated by decades of standing in classrooms and working double shifts to provide for Derek after his father died. Anyway, Caroline continued, once she's at Sunset Pines, we can finally convert that room into Emma's vlogging studio. I've already ordered the ring lights and that backdrop thing all the influencers use. My daughter's going to be a star. I just know it. I sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. It wasn't just Derek who saw me as disposable. It was his entire household. I was simply an inconvenience to be managed, an obstacle to their lifestyle aspirations. The unfairness of it all washed over me. I'd spent my life making sacrifices for my son, building a business that now helped countless families achieve financial stability through fair lending practices. Aspen Valley had become known in the industry for its compassionate approach to mortgage servicing, an approach I'd insisted on from the beginning. And here I was, being discarded by the very person I'd sacrificed everything for. I reached for the bottle of pain medication on the nightstand, carefully measuring out my prescribed Dose. As I swallowed the pills, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Derek and Caroline. Not directly. Not yet. That would only lead to denials, perhaps even false remorse. No, this situation called for something more meaningful than a heated confrontation. Derek needed to understand the true value of compassion and support, lessons he'd clearly forgotten, and there was no better teacher than consequence. I heard Caroline coming up the stairs, still chatting on her phone. Quickly, I slipped back into bed and closed my eyes, feigning sleep. The door creaked open slightly. "She's sleeping," Caroline whispered to her caller. "I swear that's all she does. Sleeps and complains about her hip hurting, like she's the first person ever to have joint replacement surgery." The door closed again, and I opened my eyes, a new resolve strengthening my spirit. Tomorrow I would return to my home, and then I would begin carefully dismantling the financial safety net I'd quietly maintained for my son all these years. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is to let their child face the reality of their own choices. The following morning, I woke before sunrise. 40 years of early rising had ingrained the habit, even during my recovery. I dressed carefully in a simple blouse and slacks rather than the loungewear I'd been wearing since the surgery. Today was about reclaiming my dignity. When the doorbell rang precisely at 7:30 a.m., I was ready, my small suitcase packed beside me. I opened the guest room door to find Caroline in the hallway, still in her silk pajamas, hair disheveled and face marked with confusion. "Who on earth is at this hour?" she demanded, as if I'd personally orchestrated an inconvenience to her. "That would be my driver," I replied calmly, maneuvering my walker past her. She blinked, processing my appearance. "Driver? What driver? Where do you think you're going?" "Home," I said simply, continuing toward the stairs. "Home? But we discussed this. You're moving to Sunset Pines on Monday. Derek has already arranged everything." I paused at the top of the staircase, turning to face her. "I appreciate the concern, but I'll be continuing my recovery in my own home." Caroline's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together. "That's ridiculous. You can't be alone right now. What if something happens? Who's going to take care of you?" "I've arranged for a home health nurse to visit daily, and I have a fully equipped medical alert system." I began descending the stairs carefully, one hand firmly on the railing. Caroline hurried after me, her voice rising with each step. "This is exactly why we're moving you to Sunset Pines. You're being stubborn and not thinking clearly. Derek will be furious." "Derek is welcome to discuss it with me after he returns from his restaurant," I replied, reaching the bottom of the stairs without incident. "Though I suspect he'll be rather busy today." The doorbell rang again. I opened it to find Raymond, Aspen Valley's head of security, standing on the porch. At 6'2", with shoulders like a linebacker, Raymond had been with the company for 15 years after retiring from the sheriff's department. "Good morning, Mrs. Thornton," he said with a respectful nod. "Your car is ready." "Thank you, Raymond." I handed him my suitcase. Caroline appeared behind me, her face flushed with anger. "Who is this man? What's going on, Eleanor?" "This is Raymond, a colleague of mine," I said, deliberately vague. "He's helping me get home safely." "A colleague from your teaching days?" Suspicion crept into her voice. "What aren't you telling us?" I turned to face my daughter-in-law fully. "There's a great deal I haven't told you, Caroline. But that was my choice, not an obligation. Now, if you'll excuse me." "You can't just leave. What am I supposed to tell Derek?" I paused at the threshold. "Tell him I received his message loud and clear, and that I'll be responding in kind very soon." Raymond helped me into the back seat of the sleek black sedan, and we pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, I could see Caroline standing in the doorway, her phone already pressed to her ear, no doubt calling Derek in a panic. "Everything all right, Mrs. Thornton?" Raymond asked, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "It will be," I said, watching my son's house disappear around the corner. It will be. The drive to my home took 25 minutes through tree-lined streets and past the small downtown area where I'd taught elementary school for 30 years. My ranch house came into view, not as grand as Derek's mini mansion, but a comfortable, well-maintained home with mature maple trees and a garden that had been featured twice in the local home and garden tour. Maggie was waiting on the porch alongside a woman in scrubs I didn't recognize. As Raymond helped me from the car, Maggie rushed forward. "Welcome home, Eleanor," she said, giving me a gentle hug, mindful of my healing hip. "This is Nurse Valerie. She'll be overseeing your home care." Nurse Valerie stepped forward with a warm smile. "Mrs. Thornton, I've set up everything you'll need in the master bedroom. I understand you're recovering from hip replacement surgery?" I nodded, allowing them to guide me inside. My home was exactly as I'd left it, but Maggie had added fresh flowers in the entryway and opened the windows to let in the spring breeze. "Now," Maggie said once I was settled in my favorite armchair in the living room, "are you ready to hear about the morning's developments? I assume Derek has received some unexpected news." I accepted the cup of tea Nurse Valerie handed me. Maggie's professional demeanor cracked slightly with a satisfied smile. "Oh, yes. The notifications about the mortgage and business loan adjustments were sent at 8 a.m. sharp. His loan officer called him during his morning meeting with those potential investors from Chicago." I sipped my tea thoughtfully. And he's been trying to reach anyone, at Aspen Valley for the last hour. According to our receptionist, he's becoming increasingly distressed. I nodded. "Have Robert call him back at noon. Tell him to explain the standard terms now being applied to his accounts, but don't mention any connection to me." "Already arranged," Maggie confirmed. "There's more, though. We've received notification that the commercial property he used as collateral for the business loan has some significant health code violations that weren't disclosed during the application process." This was news to me. "What kind of violations?" "Kitchen, ventilation primarily, but also some plumbing issues with the restrooms. The health inspector's report came in yesterday. It appears Derek has been postponing required improvements for over a year." I sighed deeply. For all his talk about being a visionary restaurateur, my son had always looked for shortcuts. It was a pattern that dated back to his school projects, grand ideas with rushed execution. "The property will need to be brought up to code immediately, if it's to remain valid collateral," Maggie continued. "The estimated cost is around $200,000. "Money he doesn't have," I murmured. "Not without selling something or finding new investors," Maggie agreed. "What would you like us to do?" I considered the question carefully. My goal wasn't to destroy my son's business or ruin him financially. I wanted him to understand consequences, to recognize the value of the support he'd taken for granted and discarded so easily. Send a formal notice requiring the property to be brought up to code within 45 days, or we'll have to reappraise the collateral value and potentially call part of the loan due, I decided. That's standard procedure. Nothing more, nothing less. Maggie made a note on her tablet. Understood. Also, Jennifer from legal will be here at 2 p.m. to discuss your estate planning. Nurse Valerie, who had been discreetly checking my vitals while we talked, interjected gently. "Mrs. Thornton, I recommend you rest before any more meetings today. Your blood pressure is a bit elevated." I nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the morning's activities. "You're right. I think I'll lie down for a while." As Maggie and Raymond prepared to leave, my phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text appeared. "Mom, where are you? Caroline said you left. Call me immediately." It was followed by another. "Something's wrong with my business loan and mortgage. Did you say something to the bank before you left? Call me." And another. "Mom, this is serious. I need your help with this bank situation. Please call me back." Handed the phone to Maggie. "Please hold all calls from Derek and Caroline until tomorrow. I need today to rest and plan." After they left, Nurse Valerie helped me to my bedroom, the same room I'd shared with Thomas until his death, the room where I'd stayed up countless nights reviewing financial statements and investment prospectuses while building my business. It was my sanctuary, and now my healing place. As I settled into bed, my thoughts turned to the small family photo on my nightstand. It showed Derek at his high school graduation, standing between me and his favorite teacher, all of us beaming with pride. He had been so full of potential then, so seemingly appreciative of the opportunities I'd worked so hard to provide. Where had that young man gone? Had I enabled his worst tendencies by silently protecting him from financial missteps all these years? Perhaps my well-intentioned safety net had become a disservice, preventing him from developing the character that comes from facing genuine hardship. I closed my eyes, feeling a complex mix of sadness and resolve. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations, but also opportunities for truth. After decades of working behind the scenes, it was finally time to step into the light, to reveal not just my ownership of Aspen Valley Lending, but my expectations for the son who had benefited from my life's work without ever truly understanding its value. I slept deeply that afternoon, the comfort of my own bed a balm after weeks in Derek's impersonal guest room. When I woke, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across my bedroom floor. Nurse Valerie had left a note saying she'd return in the evening to help with my medication, and that Maggie had rescheduled my meeting with Jennifer until the following day. The house was quiet, a silence I'd grown accustomed to over the years since Thomas's passing. But today, it felt different. Not lonely, but peaceful. I made my way carefully to my home office, a room Derek had never shown much interest in. Behind the modest desk, I pressed a hidden switch that revealed a small wall safe. Old-fashioned perhaps, but some documents were too important to trust to digital storage alone. I entered the combination and retrieved a worn leather portfolio. Inside were the original incorporation documents for Aspen Valley Lending along with the complex ownership structure I'd established decades ago. Eleanor Thornton was listed nowhere on the public-facing documents. Instead, the company was technically owned by Pinecrest Holdings, which in turn was owned by Thornton Family Trust, an entity I controlled completely. I'd created this labyrinthine structure partly for tax purposes, but largely because I never wanted Derek to feel entitled to my business success. I wanted him to build his own path, to earn his own achievements. Oh, the irony of how that had turned out. My phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. Derek has called the office 19 times. Robert spoke with him as instructed. Meeting scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. I texted back, "Will I be attending?" "Not initially," Maggie replied. "Robert will explain the situation first. You can join if you choose." Perfect. I wanted Derek to understand the business implications before confronting the personal betrayal. It would be harder for him to dismiss or emotionally manipulate the situation if he was already facing the professional consequences. I was reviewing some recent acquisition documents when the doorbell rang. Through the security camera feed on my tablet, I saw Derek standing on my porch, his normally confident posture replaced by agitated pacing. I wasn't ready for this confrontation. Not yet. I pressed the intercom button. "Derek." He spun toward the door. "Mom, open up. We need to talk." "I'm resting as my doctor advised," I replied calmly. "I believe you have a meeting scheduled at Aspen Valley Lending tomorrow morning. We can speak afterward." His face contorted with frustration. "What does my banking issue have to do with you? I need to make sure you're okay after leaving so suddenly. Caroline said you just took off with some strange man." "Raymond is a colleague, hardly a stranger, and I'm perfectly fine in my own home with professional nursing care." "This is ridiculous." Derek slammed his palm against the door. "Let me in. You can't avoid me in your condition." "My condition doesn't negate my right to privacy, Derek. Please respect my wishes and leave. We'll talk tomorrow." "Mom." His voice. cracked slightly. The bank is threatening to call my business loan. They're saying there are code violations. My mortgage payment just jumped by $1,500 a month. I need your help. There it was. The real reason for his visit. Not concern for my health, but concern for his finances. I'm sorry you're having difficulties, I said, my voice steady. But I suggest you review the original terms of your agreements. It sounds like your preferential rates may have expired. Expired? They can't just change terms without warning. Actually, if you read your documents carefully, they can adjust rates based on a variety of factors, including property maintenance and undisclosed code violations. There was a pause as he processed my unexpectedly specific knowledge. How do you know so much about my loan terms? I worked in finance for years after my teaching career, Derek. These are standard provisions. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it in a way that suddenly made him look younger, more like the boy I remembered. Please, Mom. I don't understand what's happening. First, you leave without warning. Now all my financial arrangements are falling apart on the same day. Are you angry about Sunset Pines? We can discuss other options. I believe I made my feelings about Sunset Pines quite clear by leaving. As for your financial concerns, I suggest you gather your documents and prepare for your meeting tomorrow. Aspen Valley Lending doesn't make exceptions based on personal circumstances. What's Aspen Valley to you? Why do you keep mentioning them? His frustration was building again. You'll understand tomorrow. Goodbye, Derek. I ended the intercom connection, watching as he stood there for several more minutes, alternating between knocking and checking his phone before finally returning to his car and driving away. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the dull ache in my hip that had nothing to do with my surgical incision. Part of me wanted to throw open the door to help him as I always had. But that impulse, that automatic response to shield him from discomfort, was precisely what had led us here. My phone rang again, this time showing Caroline's name. I declined the call. Seconds later, a text appeared. Eleanor, this has gone far. Enough. Derek is falling apart. Whatever point you're trying to make, you're being cruel. Think about the children. Emma and Tyler need their father focused and present, not distracted by whatever game you're playing. I almost laughed at her attempt to use my grandchildren as emotional leverage. The same grandchildren she and Derek had used as an excuse to evict me. I typed a simple response. There's no game, Caroline, only consequences. I suggest you prepare for significant changes to your household budget. I set my phone to Do Not Disturb and returned to my documents. By the time Nurse Valerie arrived to help with my evening medication, I'd finalized my strategy for the next day's revelation. You look better this evening, Valerie observed as she checked my vitals. Your color is improved, and your blood pressure is back in a normal range. I feel better, I admitted. Being home makes a difference. Sometimes the most healing thing is being in your own space, she agreed, helping me with my nighttime medication. Though I understand you have a big day tomorrow. Maggie mentioned an important meeting? Yes, I said, looking out the window at the garden Thomas and I had planted together decades ago. Tomorrow I remind my son who I really am. Morning arrived, with a soft rain pattering against my bedroom windows. I took my time dressing for the day, selecting a tailored navy suit I hadn't worn since before my surgery. It had been my armor during countless negotiations and board meetings over the years, practical, professional, and subtly powerful without being ostentatious. Today, I needed that familiar sense of authority. The hip replacement had changed my gait slightly, but the physical therapist had been clear that a cane would be sufficient support as long as I didn't overexert myself. The sleek mahogany walking stick Thomas had carved for our 25th anniversary seemed particularly appropriate. For today's revelation, Nurse Valerie arrived at 8 a.m. to check my vitals and help change my surgical dressing. Your recovery is progressing nicely, she said, applying a fresh bandage. But I'm concerned about today's meeting. Stress isn't ideal for patients recovering from major surgery. I understand the risks, I assured her. But some matters can't be postponed. She nodded reluctantly. Just promise me you'll take it easy. If you feel any pain, dizziness, or unusual fatigue, signal immediately. I'll have Raymond with me throughout the meeting, I promised. He knows what to watch for. After Valerie left, I called a car service and made my way to Aspen Valley Lending's headquarters downtown. The modest 6-story building with its energy-efficient design never failed to fill me with quiet pride. I'd started the company in a tiny rented office with just 2 employees. Now, Aspen Valley employed over 150 people and managed hundreds of millions in assets. Raymond met me at the private entrance as arranged, escorting me to the executive elevator that would take us directly to the 5th floor. Robert called. He informed me as the elevator ascended. Mr. Thornton arrived 20 minutes early and is currently waiting in the conference room. He brought his wife. I raised an eyebrow. Caroline came with him? That's unexpected. Robert says she's been doing most of the talking. Apparently, she's threatened to call their family attorney if the harassment doesn't stop. I couldn't help but smile slightly. She considers standard banking procedures to be harassment. How typical. The elevator doors opened into a plush reception area where Maggie was waiting, tablet in hand. Her normally composed expression showed hints of satisfaction. "Everything is ready, Eleanor," she said, handing me a leather portfolio. "The documents you requested are inside. Robert has reviewed the loan terms with them but hasn't revealed any connection to you. He's stalling until you're ready to enter." I took a moment to collect myself, feeling the weight of what was about to transpire. For nearly 20 years, I'd kept my professional success separate from my relationship with Derek. Part of me had always hoped he would take an interest, would ask meaningful questions about my financial acumen beyond the vague understanding that I'd done some investing after retiring from teaching. But he never had. "Let's not keep them waiting any longer," I said finally. Maggie nodded and led the way to the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Derek and Caroline sitting at the large cherrywood table. Robert, Aspen Valley's head of lending, sat across from them, his expression professionally neutral despite what appeared to be Caroline's animated complaints. Derek looked pale, his normally confident posture replaced by a tense rigidity. I noticed he was wearing the same suit from yesterday, now slightly rumpled, something the appearance-conscious son I knew would never normally allow. Maggie opened the door and announced simply, "Mrs. Thornton has arrived." 3 heads turned toward me as I entered. Robert's with respectful acknowledgement, Derek and Caroline's with complete confusion. "Mom?" Derek stood abruptly. "What are you doing here? We're in the middle of an important meeting." "I'm aware," I replied calmly, taking a seat at the head of the table. Raymond positioned himself discreetly by the door. Caroline looked between me and Robert, her perfectly contoured face scrunched in confusion. "Is this some kind of joke? We're here to discuss serious financial matters with Aspen Valley's management." "You are?" I confirmed, opening the portfolio Maggie had given me. "That's precisely why I'm here." Robert cleared his throat. "As I was explaining, Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, the preferential terms you've been enjoying on both your mortgage and business loan were special considerations that have now been withdrawn. The current terms being applied are the standard rates and conditions as outlined in your original agreements." "But why?" Derek demanded, frustration evident in his voice. "We've never missed a payment. There's no justification for suddenly increasing our rates and demanding immediate action on those health code issues." "Actually," I interjected, "maintaining properties to code is a standard requirement for using them as loan collateral. It's explicitly stated in Section 14, Paragraph 3 of your agreement." Derek stared at me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time that day. "How would you know that? Why are you even here?" I slid a document across the table toward him. "Because Aspen Valley Lending is my company, Derek. I founded it 20 years ago, and I still maintain controlling interest through Pinecrest Holdings and Thornton Family Trust. The silence that followed was profound. Derek picked up the document, with trembling hands, scanning the ownership structure that clearly demonstrated my position. Caroline leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening as comprehension dawned. "This is impossible," Derek finally whispered. "You're a retired elementary school teacher." "Is that what you've been telling people?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I never said that. You simply never asked what I actually did after leaving the classroom." "But," his voice faltered, "all those times I talked about my restaurant's financial challenges, my mortgage concerns, you never said anything. You never asked for my input, Derek. Besides, I wanted you to succeed on your own merits, not because of my connections." Caroline found her voice, though it had lost its usual sharp edge. "So all this time when we were struggling with the business, with the mortgage payments, I was watching," I confirmed, "and occasionally intervening. Though you never knew it. Who do you think arranged for your loan modification last year when you missed 2 mortgage payments? Or expedited the business loan approval when you were rushing to open your second location?" Derek sank back into his chair, his face ashen. "I don't understand. If you own the company, why are you doing this to us now? Why punish us?" "This isn't punishment, Derek." I kept my voice even despite the ache in my heart. "This is simply the removal of special treatment. You're being held to the same standards as every other Aspen Valley client." "But why now?" he pressed, a note of desperation entering his voice. I looked him directly in the eyes. "Because you handed me eviction papers while I was recovering from hip surgery. Because you planned to sell my possessions without my consent. Because you and Caroline discussed me as if I were a burden to be managed rather than a person to be respected." Caroline at least had the grace to flush with embarrassment. Derek looked away, unable to hold my gaze. "So this is revenge," he muttered. "No, Derek, this is consequence," I corrected him. "There's a significant difference. Revenge would be calling. Your loans due immediately and forcing you into bankruptcy, which I had every legal right to do given the undisclosed health code violations." Robert nodded in confirmation, adding, "Mrs. Thornton actually insisted we offer you a compliance plan, with reasonable timelines, which is more consideration than our standard protocols would allow." Derek looked up, surprise flashing across his features. "You're not shutting me down?" "That was never my intention," I said softly. "Despite everything, you're still my son. I don't want to destroy what you've built. I simply want you to understand the true cost of your choices, both financially and personally." Caroline, ever practical when money was concerned, leaned forward. "What exactly does this mean for us? What are our options?" I nodded to Robert, who slid a folder across the table. "These are your current obligations under standard terms. Your monthly mortgage payment has increased to reflect market rates. The business loan remains stable provided you address the code violations within the time frame specified." Derek opened the folder, and I could see him mentally calculating the numbers. "This would require significant lifestyle adjustments," he said finally, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Yes," I agreed simply. "It would." "And if we can't manage it?" Caroline asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Then you'll need to consider downsizing or finding additional legitimate income sources," I replied. "Just like any other family facing financial challenges." The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. I could see it in their expressions. The dawning comprehension that the safety net they never knew existed had been removed, and they were now truly facing the consequences of their financial decisions for the first time. "I never meant," Derek began, then stopped, seeming unsure how to continue. "We should discuss this privately," I said, rising from my chair. "Robert, thank you for your time. Please ensure all of Mr. Thornton's accounts are properly documented according to standard procedures." "Of course, Mrs. Thornton," Robert replied. With a slight bow, I turned to Derek and Caroline. I believe we have more to discuss, but this isn't the appropriate venue. If you'd like to continue this conversation, you're welcome to join me for lunch at Riverside Cafe in an hour. I have one more meeting to attend first. Without waiting for their response, I left the conference room, Raymond following discreetly, behind me. Once we were safely in the executive elevator, I finally allowed myself to exhale fully, feeling the tension of the confrontation in every muscle. "Are you all right, Mrs. Thornton?" Raymond asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes," I said, though the heaviness in my chest had intensified. "Just processing." The truth was, I had imagined this moment for years, the day when Derek would finally understand who I really was, what I had accomplished. But I had always pictured it differently. In my imagination, there had been pride in his eyes, perhaps even admiration. Never this shocked dismay, this cornered desperation. As the elevator descended, I wondered if I had made the right choice in keeping my success hidden from him for so long. Had my attempt to prevent entitlement instead fostered ignorance? Had my desire to see him succeed independently deprived him of valuable mentorship? These questions would have to wait. The first step in rebuilding our relationship, if that was even possible now, was complete honesty. No more protective shields, no more silent interventions. Whether Derek would embrace this new reality or retreat further into resentment remained to be seen. The Riverside Cafe occupied the ground floor of a historic building overlooking the city's waterfront. I'd chosen it deliberately, public enough to encourage civility, yet private enough for a meaningful conversation. I sat at a corner table with a clear view of both the entrance and the peaceful river beyond, sipping herbal tea while I waited. Part of me wondered if Derek and Caroline would show up at all. The confrontation at Aspen Valley had stripped away their assumptions and left them reeling. It would be easier for them to retreat, to nurture their wounded pride in private rather than face me again. At precisely 1, the cafe door opened. Derek entered alone, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. He looked different somehow. The polished corporate veneer had slipped, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. He approached slowly, as if unsure of his welcome. "I join you?" he asked formally, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Please," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. He sat down, fidgeting with the napkin on the table. "Caroline isn't coming. She's processing everything." "I understand. It's a lot to take in." I signaled the waiter, who promptly brought menus. Derek declined his with a shake of his head. "I'm not hungry." "You should eat something," I said, the motherly concern rising automatically despite everything. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "I'm not a child, Mom. I can decide whether I want to eat or not." "Fair enough," I conceded, ordering only for myself. After the waiter left, an uncomfortable silence settled between us. Through the window, I watched a small boat navigate the currents of the river, struggling against the flow before finally finding its path. "How long have you been planning this?" Derek finally asked, his voice low. "Planning what exactly?" "This ambush, this public humiliation." I set down my teacup carefully. "It wasn't planned at all, Derek. I had no intention of revealing my connection to Aspen Valley until you decided I was too inconvenient to keep in your home." His jaw tightened. "That's not fair. We were trying to do what was best for you." Sunset. Pines is a premium facility. What's not fair is making life-altering decisions for someone without their input, I countered. What's not fair is discussing me as if I were incapable of managing my own affairs. What's not fair is treating the woman who raised you like an unwanted house guest. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the defensive facade. "I thought we were helping you. Did you ask what help I needed or wanted?" He looked away. "No." "Exactly. You decided what was convenient for you and framed it as concern for me. That's not help, Derek. That's control. The waiter arrived with my salad, and we paused until he was out of earshot. I still don't understand why you never told me about Aspen Valley, Derek said, redirecting the conversation. All these years, I thought you had some modest retirement from teaching. I worried about your finances. I couldn't help but laugh, softly. You worried about my finances while I was secretly ensuring yours remained stable despite your overspending. He had the grace to look embarrassed. If I'd known, I'd have treated you differently, shown more respect. That's precisely why I kept it private, Derek. I wanted to be valued as your mother, not as a financial resource. He absorbed this, his brow furrowed in concentration. But why go to such lengths to hide it? The shell companies, the trusts, it's so elaborate. I had my reasons, I said, picking at my salad. When I started Aspen Valley, the financial world wasn't welcoming to women entrepreneurs. The complex structure provided certain advantages. Later, it became useful for tax planning and privacy. And yes, eventually it became a way to observe your financial decisions without interference. So you've been watching me struggle, making mistakes, while you could have helped. There was an edge of accusation in his voice. I did help, more than you know. I corrected him. But I couldn't step in every time. You needed to learn your own lessons. Like now? The bitterness was evident. Yes, like now. I met his gaze steadily. Though I never expected the lesson would be about how you treat your mother. He fell silent, again staring out at the river. I continued eating, allowing him the space to process. What happens next? He finally asked, his voice quieter. With the loans, with Aspen Valley, with us? I set down my fork, considering my words carefully. Professionally, nothing changes from what Robert explained. Your accounts will be maintained according to standard terms. You'll need to address the code violations within the time frame specified and adjust your budget to accommodate the increased mortgage payment. And personally? This was the harder question, the one I'd been wrestling with myself. That depends on you, Derek, on whether you can see me as I truly am, not as the convenient maternal figure you've constructed in your mind. And what about how you see me? He challenged. You've been judging my financial decisions, my lifestyle choices, all without me knowing. How is that fair? Perhaps it wasn't, I admitted. We've both made mistakes in our relationship. The difference is, I'm willing to acknowledge mine. The waiter cleared my plate, refilled our water glasses, and retreated discreetly. I don't know how to fix this, Derek confessed, a rare moment of genuine vulnerability breaking through. Neither do I. Not completely, I replied honestly. But recognizing there's something broken is the first step. He nodded slowly, then reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded paper. I brought something. I wasn't sure if I'd give it to you, but he handed it across the table. I unfolded it carefully. It was a child's drawing, faded with age, a crayon sketch of a woman with a book in one hand and what looked like money in the other, standing beside a little boy. My superhero mom was scrawled across the top in childish handwriting. I made this in 3rd grade, Derek said softly. For career day, when everyone asked what my mom did, I told them you were a teacher who was also a secret millionaire. I didn't really understand what investing was, but I knew you were smart about money. You were always reading those financial magazines and books. I stared at the drawing, memories flooding back. I remember this. You gave it to me for Mother's Day. You kept it on your desk for years, he continued. Then one day it was gone. I thought you'd thrown it away. No, I shook my head. I moved it to my home office when you started bringing friends home from college. I thought you might be embarrassed. Buy it. I forgot about it, to be honest, he admitted. Found it yesterday in that box of old school things in your attic. Made me remember how proud I used to be telling everyone my mom was the smartest person I knew. I felt a tightness in my throat. What changed, Derek? He shrugged helplessly. I don't know. Life. Time. Success came easily for me early on, and then it didn't. I finished for him. That's usually when we discover who we truly are. I'm not sure I like who I've become, he said so quietly I almost didn't hear him. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. Then change, I said simply. It's never too late. He finally looked up, meeting my eyes directly. The health code violations at the restaurant. They're worse than I admitted to Aspen Valley. The inspector estimates closer to $300,000 to bring everything up to standard. With the increased mortgage payment, I'm not sure we can manage it. What about downsizing? I suggested. The house in Lakeview Heights is far larger than you need. He winced. Caroline would never agree. Our address, our lifestyle, it's everything to her. Then perhaps this is a conversation you need to have with your wife, I suggested gently, about priorities, values, what truly matters. Like the conversation I should have had with you instead of arranging sunset pines behind your back, he acknowledged. Exactly. Derek rubbed his temples, looking suddenly exhausted. I don't know how to start over, Mom. I don't know how to be the son you deserve. You begin by seeing me as I am, I said. Not as an obligation or a resource, but as a person with my own life, my own accomplishments, my own agency. And I'll try to do the same for you, to see the man you are, not just the boy I raised. For the first time since he'd arrived, Derek smiled faintly. The woman I'm looking at right now is pretty intimidating, you know. Financial magnate, strategic genius, secret CEO. Makes me wonder if I inherited any of those qualities at all. You did, I assured him. You've just been using them to navigate the wrong priorities. The check arrived, and I reached for it automatically. Let me, Derek said, his hand covering mine on the table. Please, it's a very small start, but it's something. I nodded and withdrew my hand, watching as he settled the bill. As we stood to leave, he hesitated. Would you be willing to come see the kids this weekend? They've been asking about you. I didn't know what to tell them when you left so suddenly. Tell them the truth, I suggested. In age-appropriate ways, of course. That grandma needed to be in her own home to recover properly. That sometimes adults make mistakes in how they treat each other, but they can learn and do better. He nodded thoughtfully. And about Aspen Valley? About who you really are? I considered this. Yes, tell them that too. They should know their grandmother built something meaningful. Girls especially need those examples. As we walked out of the cafe together, I felt something shift between us. Not a resolution, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of a more honest foundation. The path forward would be complicated, with both practical and emotional challenges to navigate. But for the first time in years, I felt like my son was actually seeing me, not as he wished me to be, but as I truly was. When I returned home from lunch with Derek, I found Maggie waiting in my living room, surrounded by neatly organized stacks of documents. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. How did it go? She asked, setting aside her tablet. I sank into my favorite armchair, suddenly aware of the physical toll the day had taken. Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped. We're talking at least. That's something, she acknowledged. Did he take responsibility for his actions? He's starting to, I said, thinking of the vulnerability Derek had shown at the cafe. It's a process. Maggie nodded, though I could see skepticism in her eyes. She'd witnessed years of Derek's entitled behavior from the sidelines, always professional, but undoubtedly forming her own opinions. I've prepared the documents for your meeting with Jennifer, she said, changing the subject. She'll be here at 4 to discuss your estate planning revisions. Thank you. I glanced at the imposing stacks of paper. Is all of this necessary? Unfortunately, yes. Restructuring your holdings while maintaining the operational integrity of Aspen Valley requires significant documentation. She hesitated. Eleanor, are you certain about these changes? They're substantial. I'm certain, I said firmly. Today reinforced what I've been considering for months. It's time. She nodded, accepting my decision without further question, one of the many reasons I valued her so highly. Will you need me to stay for the meeting with Jennifer? No, I can manage. You've done more than enough today. Go home to your family, Maggie. I have a feeling tomorrow will be equally demanding. After she left, I rested briefly before Nurse. Valerie arrived for my afternoon checkup. She frowned slightly as she took my blood pressure. It's elevated, she noted. I understand you had an important meeting today, but you need to be mindful of your recovery. I know, I acknowledged. Tomorrow will be quieter. See that it is, she said firmly. Your body needs rest to heal properly. She helped me change my bandages and reviewed my medication schedule before departing, leaving me with strict instructions to take it easy for the remainder of the day. Jennifer arrived promptly at 4, her gray suit as impeccably tailored as always. For 15 years, she'd been my trusted legal advisor, helping me navigate the complex structures I'd created for Aspen Valley and my personal assets. Maggie briefed me on today's events, she said as she settled at my dining room table. Quite the revelation for your son. Long overdue, I admitted. But that's not why I asked you here. No, I understand you want to discuss significant changes to your estate plan. She opened her briefcase and extracted several documents. Are you certain this is the right time? Major decisions after emotional events can sometimes lead to regrets. I appreciated her caution. This isn't a reactive decision, Jennifer. I've been contemplating these changes for months. Today simply confirmed their necessity. She nodded, accepting my assurance. Then let's review what you have in mind. For the next 2 hours, we meticulously worked through the restructuring of my estate plan. The changes weren't punitive. I wasn't disinheriting Derek or cutting him out of my legacy. Instead, I was creating a more thoughtful structure that would benefit him while encouraging responsibility. So, to summarize, Jennifer said as we finalized the details, you're establishing a series of milestone-based trusts for Derek and his family. Rather than outright inheritance, they'll receive distributions based on specific achievements and responsibilities. Exactly. And the same structure for my grandchildren's education and future needs. And regarding Aspen Valley itself, 30% ownership will transfer to Derek upon completion of the executive training program and demonstration of appropriate business acumen. The remaining 70% will be held in trust with profits directed to the charitable foundation we discussed. Jennifer made a final notation. It's an elegant solution, Eleanor. Generous yet structured. But have you considered how Derek will react? This is significantly different from your previous arrangement where he would have eventually inherited controlling interest in the company. I have, I said, thinking of our conversation at the cafe. I believe that once he processes everything, he'll understand it's not a punishment, but an opportunity, the chance to earn something meaningful rather than simply receiving it. And if he doesn't see it that way, then perhaps he's not ready for the responsibility Aspen Valley represents, I said simply. Jennifer gathered her papers. I'll have the final documents prepared for your signature by the end of the week. Is there anything else you'd like to address today? I hesitated, then decided to voice the concern that had been lingering since my conversation with Derek. What about Caroline? Derek mentioned she's particularly resistant to the idea of downsizing or changing their lifestyle. Jennifer leaned back in her chair. The daughter-in-law factor. In my experience, financial stress often reveals the true foundation of a marriage. If their relationship is solid, they'll weather this adjustment together. If not, she shrugged, eloquently. I don't want to be responsible for causing problems in their marriage, I said. With all due respect, Eleanor, you aren't. Their financial situation is the result of their choices. You've simply stopped artificially mitigating the consequences. She closed her briefcase with a decisive click. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those we love is to allow them to face reality. After Jennifer left, I sat alone in my quiet house, contemplating her words. Was I truly helping Derek by restructuring everything? Or was I imposing my own values on his life? The line between guidance and control could be vanishingly thin, especially between parent and child. My thoughts were interrupted by a text message from Derek. Spoke with Caroline. Difficult conversation, but necessary. May we come see you tomorrow? She has things she wants to say. I responded simply, of course, 2 p.m. We'll be there. Thank you. I set my phone down, wondering what Caroline could possibly want to say to me. Our relationship had always been cordial but distant. She'd made it clear from the beginning that she considered my modest lifestyle and practical values somewhat beneath her aspirations. Finding myself too restless to sit still, I made my way carefully to the backyard garden. The early evening air was fragrant with spring blossoms, and the familiar work of deadheading spent flowers and checking new growth was soothing. Gardening had always been my refuge, a pursuit where patience and consistent care yielded visible results over time. As I gently pruned a climbing rose that had been part of the garden since Thomas and I first moved in, I reflected on how similar raising a child had been. Years of nurturing, guiding, pruning back where necessary, supporting growth where it showed promise. But somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of the need to let Derek develop his own root system, to weather his own storms without my invisible support. My neighbor Harriet appeared at the fence, garden shears in hand. "Those roses are coming along beautifully this year," she observed. "Much better than mine." "They just need consistent attention," I replied, smiling at her. "Like children," she said wisely. "Speaking of which, I saw your son leaving earlier. You, two finally having a proper talk?" Harriet had witnessed the gradual distance growing between Derek and me over the years, offering her quiet support without prying. "We're working on it," I admitted. "It's complicated." "Family always is." She clipped a stray branch from her side of the fence. "My daughter didn't speak to me for 2 years after I told her that fiancé of hers was bad news. Then when he cleaned out their bank account and disappeared, suddenly mother's wisdom was back in fashion." I laughed despite myself. "I'm not sure I'd wish that particular vindication on anyone. No, but sometimes children need to learn their own lessons, even when we can see the train coming a mile away." She tucked her shears into her apron pocket. "The trick is being there to help pick up the pieces without saying, 'I told you so.'" "Wise advice," I acknowledged. "Well, I've had practice. 3 children, 8 grandchildren. You learn a thing or two about when to speak and when to bite your tongue." She gestured toward my hip. "Don't overdo it with that gardening. Your hip needs you to take it easy." I promise I'm being careful. After Harriet returned to her own garden, I sat on the bench Thomas had built decades ago, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. Tomorrow would bring another challenging conversation with Derek and Caroline. Then there would be the practical matters of their financial situation to address, the revised estate planning documents to sign, and eventually decisions about Aspen Valley's future leadership. The path forward wasn't entirely clear, but for the first time in years, it felt honest. No more silent interventions. No more hidden safety nets. No more pretending to be less than I was to preserve my son's ego or independence. I had spent decades building Aspen Valley Lending into a company known for its integrity and fairness. Perhaps it was time to bring those same values fully into my personal life, to expect from my family the same honesty and respect I demanded in my professional dealings. As darkness settled over the garden, I made my way back inside, feeling a curious lightness despite the challenges ahead. The surgical pain in my hip seemed less pronounced, as if the emotional weight I'd been carrying had been causing its own kind of pressure. Sometimes, I reflected as I prepared for bed, the most healing step isn't a medical intervention, but simply standing in your truth, regardless of how uncomfortable that might make others. Tomorrow would test that theory when Caroline arrived. But tonight, in the quiet of my own home, I felt more at peace than I had in years. The next morning, I found myself rearranging the living room slightly, ensuring there was comfortable seating for our meeting. Nurse Valerie arrived for her regular check, pleased to find my blood pressure had normalized overnight. Much better, she noted, removing the cuff. Whatever you did yesterday evening seems to have helped. Just some gardening and reflection, I told her. Sometimes the best medicine isn't medicine at all. Don't tell the pharmaceutical companies, she quipped, packing up her equipment. Will you be having visitors today? My son and daughter-in-law are coming at 2. She nodded, making a note on my chart. I'll return after they leave. Family visits can be energizing. You'll need to rest afterward. Her diplomatic choice of words made me smile. I have a feeling energizing might be an understatement. After Valerie left, I took extra care with my appearance. Not out of vanity, but as armor. My tailored navy slacks and cream cashmere sweater projected casual confidence, a silent reminder that I wasn't an infirm old woman to be managed, but a capable professional taking time to recover. At precisely 2 the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Derek and Caroline standing awkwardly on my porch. Derek looked much as he had yesterday, slightly rumpled, the polished veneer slipping. Caroline, however, was a surprise. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup that had been her uniform for as long as I'd known her. Instead, she wore simple jeans and a blouse, her face nearly bare of cosmetics, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Please come in, I said, stepping aside to allow them entry. They followed me to the living room where I'd arranged tea service on the coffee table, my mother's fine china that only came out for significant occasions. This qualified. Your house. Looks nice, Caroline offered stiffly as she perched on the edge of the sofa. It's been a while since we visited. 2 years, I confirmed, taking my seat in the armchair opposite them. Not since Christmas before last. Derek winced slightly at the precision of my memory. Mom, Caroline has something she wants to say to you. I turned my attention to my daughter-in-law, who was uncharacteristically fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. I'm listening. Caroline took a deep breath as if steeling herself. First, I want to apologize for how we treated you after your surgery. There's no excuse for it. Her voice, usually confident to the point of arrogance, trembled slightly. Derek told me everything about yesterday. About Aspen Valley. About how you've been helping us financially without our knowledge. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. I've spent the last 24 hours thinking about every interaction we've had over the years. How dismissive I've been. How I treated you. Like you couldn't possibly understand our sophisticated lifestyle. The air quotes she made around sophisticated were accompanied by a grimace of self-awareness I'd never seen from her before. All the while, you were running a company that could buy and sell our world 10 times over. It's humiliating. Honestly, that was never my intention, I said quietly. I know. She met my eyes directly, perhaps for the first time in our relationship. That's what makes it worse. You never flaunted your success or used it to make us feel small. You could have put us in our place 100 times, but you didn't. Instead, you watched us struggle and quietly helped when things got too bad, Dreckie. Reached over and took her hand, a gesture of support that surprised me. They'd always maintained a certain public image of perfect coupledom, but genuine moments of connection had seemed rare. We stayed up all night talking, Derek explained. Really talking, maybe for the first time in years, about our finances, our choices, our values. And? I prompted. Caroline straightened her shoulders. And we've made some decisions. We're selling the house in Lakeview Heights. This was unexpected. Are you certain? That home has been a cornerstone of your identity. That's exactly the problem, she said with startling clarity. We've been living for appearances, not for substance. The truth is we've been miserable, trying to maintain that lifestyle, the constant pressure, the keeping up with neighbors and friends who probably have just as much debt as we do. She shook her head. It's exhausting. We've already contacted a realtor, Derek added. If we can sell quickly, even at a slight loss, we can resolve the underwater mortgage situation and have enough to properly address the code violations at the restaurant. I studied them both carefully, searching for signs that this was merely another performance. But there was something different in their demeanor. A weight lifted despite the financial challenges they still faced. Where will you live? I asked. Practically. We found a rental in Westridge Heights, Derek replied. It's a townhouse, much smaller than what we're used to, but in a good school district for the kids. It will let us reset financially while we figure out next steps. The kids aren't thrilled, Caroline admitted with a rueful smile. Emma especially. No private vlogging studio, no pool, but they'll adjust. Children are remarkably resilient when given the chance, I observed. Often more so than we give them credit for. Derek nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket. There's something else we wanted to give you. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check, a substantial one, made out to me personally. What is this for? I asked, though I had a suspicion. It's every penny we can pull together right now, Derek explained. A first payment toward what we borrowed for the restaurant's initial startup, the down payment on the house, all of it. We know it doesn't come close to covering everything, but it's a start. I never expected repayment for those things, I said truthfully. But they shouldn't have been gifts, Caroline interjected with surprising firmness. We should have lived, within our means from the beginning. We're going to pay back everything, even if it takes years. I looked down at the check, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. The amount wasn't significant to me financially. I could earn this much in investment returns before breakfast, but what it represented was priceless. Acknowledgement, responsibility, a commitment to change. I appreciate the gesture, I said, finally, but I'd like to suggest an alternative. They exchanged a glance, then turned back to me questioningly. I'd like this amount to be the first deposit in your children's education funds instead, I proposed. A fresh start for the next generation. Derek's eyes widened slightly. You still want to help with their education after everything? They're my grandchildren, I said simply. Their future shouldn't be compromised by adult mistakes. Caroline's composure finally broke, tears welling in her eyes. Why are you being so kind to us? We don't deserve it. This isn't about deserving, I replied, echoing the words I'd spoken to Derek yesterday. It's about family, about moving forward with honesty rather than resentment. 1 year later, I stood at the podium in Aspen Valley's newly renovated community room, surveying the gathered employees, board members, and special guests. The company's 25th anniversary celebration had brought together people from throughout our history, from early employees to our newest recruits. When I founded this company a quarter century ago, I began, my voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. I had a vision of financial services that prioritized people over profits. Today, as I look at what we've accomplished together, I see that vision realized beyond what I could have imagined. My gaze found Maggie in the front row, who had been with me for most of that journey. From the side of the stage, Derek watched me with an expression I'd grown familiar with over the past year, a mixture of pride and attentive respect. He had earned his place as Aspen Valley's Director of Community Development, creating innovative programs that helped struggling small businesses thrive in our service area. The transition hadn't been without challenges, but he had faced them with a determination that reminded me of myself in my early career days. Today, I'm pleased to announce the formal launch of the Thornton Foundation, I said, moving to the next phase of my speech. With an initial endowment of $10 million, the foundation will focus on financial literacy education, affordable housing initiatives, and support for senior citizens in our community. Applause rippled through the audience. In the second row, Caroline smiled. Her involvement with the foundation's education programs had evolved into a full-time position as its outreach director. The role suited her organizational talents and newly discovered passion for helping others. I'm particularly pleased to announce that the Youth Financial Literacy Program will be spearheaded by my granddaughter, Emma Thornton, who at 16 has already demonstrated remarkable initiative in bringing budgeting workshops to her peers. More applause as Emma, sitting beside her brother, blushed slightly at the recognition. Her social media platform had transformed from beauty vlogging to financial education for teenagers, with a following that surprised us all. The program she developed had already been implemented in 2 local high schools. After the ceremony, I made my way to the garden patio where a small family celebration awaited. Derek and Caroline's new home, a modest but charming 3-bedroom in a friendly neighborhood, had been the setting for regular family dinners over the past year. The change had been good for all of them. I could see it in their relaxed postures and genuine smiles. "Grandma!" Tyler called, rushing over to show me his latest hockey medal. At 13, he'd discovered that the community hockey league offered just as much satisfaction as the expensive private team, with far less pressure. "That's wonderful, Tyler," I said, examining the medal with appropriate appreciation. "Your team must be very proud." "Coach says I'm getting really good at defense," he beamed. "And Dad comes to every game now." That simple statement contained volumes. The Derek I'd known a year ago had been perpetually too busy with work emergencies to attend his children's activities. The new Derek had reorganized his priorities completely. Emma joined us, her tablet in hand. "Grandma, I've been working on the slide deck for next week's workshop at Jefferson High. Would you mind looking it over? I added those retirement calculation examples you suggested." "I'd be happy to," I said, genuinely impressed by her dedication. Caroline approached with a tray of refreshments. The designer clothes were long gone, replaced by a style both practical and flattering. More striking was the authentic contentment that had replaced her perpetual dissatisfaction. "Mom," she said, the term still new between us but growing more natural. "We've set up that garden space we talked about. It's small, but I think you'll like what we've done with it." She led me to a sunny corner of their yard where a raised bed had been installed, perfect for gardening without straining my hip, which had healed beautifully over the past year. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me deeply. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself sitting with Derek on their modest deck, watching the family interact. "I never thought I'd say this," he admitted quietly, "but losing that house was the best thing that ever happened to us. We were drowning in that lifestyle, and I couldn't even see it. Sometimes we need to lose what we think matters to discover what actually does," I replied. He nodded thoughtfully. "The foundation board approved that expansion of the small business mentoring program yesterday. We should be able to help twice as many owners avoid the mistakes I made." "You've turned those mistakes into valuable experience," I observed. "That's the mark of true growth." As dusk settled, I prepared to leave for my own home, which remained my sanctuary. Derek walked me to my car, pausing before opening the door. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what specifically?" I asked. "For not giving up on me. For seeing who I could be, even when I was at my worst." I placed my hand on his cheek, a maternal gesture I hadn't used since he was a boy. That's what parents do at their best. They see beyond the current moment to the potential beneath. Driving home through the quiet evening streets, I reflected on the journey of the past year. What had begun with betrayal and pain had transformed into something I never expected, a more authentic relationship with my son and his family, a renewed purpose for my business, and perhaps most surprisingly, a deeper peace within myself. The crisis that had started with eviction papers had ultimately led to a homecoming of a different sort. Not to a physical place, but to honest connection and mutual respect. And that, I realized, was worth far more than any mortgage I could ever own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.